Hello everybody, my name is OceanMud and I'm the Monsters Faction Ambassador. If you're watching this video, then you're either on my YouTube channel or the Plaguewent website, which now allows you to upload deck guides. This guide I'm going to be making today is for Gernichora, who I believe is one of the strongest leaders on the pro ladder today, and it will consist of Thrive units as well as removal units, and I have some spiciness mixed in as well. This guide is for newer players and experienced players, and I'll give a few tips for what to do when you're up against factions as the player one and you're trying to make your first move, because I know that's kind of difficult in a lot of situations. So without further ado, let's actually go inside the deck builder and see what we're working with. Okay everybody, so here we are inside the deck builder. I have the deck in front of me, and if you'd like to create the deck, and then if you have any questions, pause the video and actually look at the cards individually, then you can go ahead and do that. Because what I'm going to go ahead and do is show you the synergies between the cards and how they interact with each other. So we can go ahead and just start with the bottom. You have your Nekkers, which will be your Thrive units as well as your Nekker Warriors. You put these down early and often, and they get built off of by the bigger cards. You have Foglet, which is used for thinning alongside Wild Hunt Rider, and these can be triggered, the Foglet rather, with Cyclops as well as the Brewis Crone. So you have your Drowner, which is also Thrive, and you have your Ghoul, which works well with your Griffins, which are 8 points for 7 provisions, and Griffin is used with your Gernichora Leech. You also have Predatory Dive, and Predatory Dive is used when you're going second, round 1, and your opponent plays a card, which is usually an engine, and sometimes they even tactically advantage it and give it plus 5 points. And so when you use Predatory Dive in that situation, you're actually trading 2 for 1, which is fantastic. So I always like to put a Predatory Dive in the deck. You have your Witchers, which are used for thinning, and you then have Gimpy Gerwin, which is used for eliminating multiple cards. Sometimes people put down multiple Nekkers, which makes Gimpy insane value, and it also helps prevent Aileron, and it has good synergy with Slave Infantry in Nilfgaard. So Gimpy is just an all-around good card for its provision. You have the Crones, and the Crones are fantastic because, like I said, the Brewis works well with Gernichora's Leech, as well as the Foglet, and the Wispus can be used as removal, and Weavis is fantastic in buffing a unit, boosting a unit. You have the Unicorns, which are used for removal and buffing as well, boosting. And your final card is Commander's Horn, which will be your finisher in round 3. Commander's Horn cannot be matched in points for the most part, and if it can be, then you can limit them, like for example Zoltan, by eliminating the units with the Chironax as well as the Wispus and the Cyclops. So Gernichora's Leech provides you sometimes a 5th unit. So Commander's Horn is very good in this deck, I feel, and I think this deck can do amazing things in the right hands, and even for newer players, I think it's a great deck to start off with. So let's go ahead and go inside a game, and I'll give you some quick tips on how to improve play and can get you even further in the ladder. Okay, so right now we're against Queen Meve in our first game. Now what I'd like for you to do is to stop the video and tell me what you would do with this hand as a first play versus Queen Meve, and I'll wait. Okay, so if you didn't stop the video, well, nothing happened, but I decided to play Rider instead of the Griffin. The reason why I chose Rider is because I know that Queen Meve likes to play engines, and so they played the Revenant now, but they could have played the Arbalest, and I need a way to take care of that engine. Now, if I were to have used Cyclops here, I decided to use Chironax, then the next engine that Queen Meve plays will be a 3, and she won't be able to boost it. So I'd actually be losing damage if I threw a 4 at that 4, and then Chironax to 3. So Meve ended up playing Vess here, and that allows me to do a Cyclops in the 3. So you can see how doing the Chironax first into Cyclops is better than doing Cyclops into Chironax. One thing to keep in mind here is that you won't always have Chironax and Cyclops in your hand. So that's why I started with the Rider, in case I had to take care of the threat of the Revenant with the Cyclops. But I fortunately had Chironax and Cyclops in my hand. A final thing to keep in mind is, let's say I started with Griffin. So I go let's say I start with the Leech into Griffin, and then he plays the Revenant. Then I would make another Leech, and then I would Chironex. And then I would have to throw the Chironex, because the Leech would be at 2 in that situation, into the Vest, and I'd be missing a point. So that's why it's very important to get your order with the Chironex as well as the Cyclops in this situation. So this is how I play first round. If I go first versus Queen Meave, you have to be careful about the engines, and if you are careful, then it'll work well for you in the later rounds, because we all know that 1 point can make a difference. So let's move on to our next faction. Okay, so here we are with our next faction, Kraken Crate. We can see that I start with the Foglet, although I have the option of the Rider this time. Why did I start with the Foglet? Well, I know that Kraken Crates, as well as Skellig in general, like to run Marauder. And so what Marauder does is it does 4 damage to random units. So if they use that Marauder, which we can see the opponent did, then he's actually helping me thin out my deck. So that's why I didn't start with the Rider, that's why I didn't start with the Griffin, and that's why I encourage everybody when you're going against Skellig as a first play to just go ahead and throw the Foglet. If I didn't have the Foglet, then what I would have done was I probably would have started with the Rider, because if you do the Rider, then it has a higher chance of killing the Gernichora's fruit, whereas if I just do the Griffin, then it would just do 4 damage to the Griffin. So if you are lucky and they do kill the Gernichora's fruit, then you're essentially saving 2 damage since you just make another Gernichora's fruit the next turn. So this is how I play versus Skellig whenever I go first as a first turn, and just keep that in mind of playing the Foglet first. Let's go ahead and move on to our next faction though, and see what else we have in store for ourselves. Okay, so here we are versus another Gernichora. So this is the monsters. So what would you do as a first play versus Gernichora? What I went ahead and did was I actually played the Rider. You always start with Rider, and then you want to tactically advantage that Rider. The reason why is that you have to prevent the opponent from playing their own Rider. Now, if I would have done Witchers, for example, and then tactically advantaged the Witchers, then it would have been an 8-point card. So I did Rider specifically because Riders can become 9s, and that will block their Griffin if they decide to do it, and they wouldn't be able to Rider then. So we can see that he does a bunch of Nekkers here. It's going to continue on a little bit. I'm doing this on purpose. This is one of the longer videos for the faction. But you can see I played the Drowner to minimize the Nekker damage. And that's all you really want to do. You just want to minimize their thrives as much as possible. So I go ahead and play, it looks to be the Wispus. And so what happens now is pretty important. So they go ahead and play the Foglet, which is low tempo. I'm at, how many cards do I have left? 6. So I'm at 5 cards right now. And you can see that I'm up by 20 points. So he needs 21 point play. Now, what the opponent doesn't realize is that if they play Wyvern here, they're 14 points down, which means they need a 15 point play even with their Thrive. What my opponent doesn't realize is that Riders doesn't actually do it for him anymore. So by me making the Riders a 9 and then making them Wyvern me later on, it actually gives me a good pass right now. And if he can't do it in 1 card, he actually will go down an additional card, and I'll have a 1 card advantage for the rest of the game. So this is the importance of starting with Rider and then tactically advantaging the Rider later on, or in that exact same turn, is because they won't be able to catch up with you, and they desperately want to get their Rider out, and so you'll be able to mitigate it, and you could potentially even end up in my situation where I was just an extra card up for the rest of the game. So this is how I handle Gernichora and monsters in general. I usually play Riders and then I tactically advantage it. And if I don't have that, then I might just play a Griffin. But you always want to make sure that as a first play, you prevent them from doing Riders. So that's how I handle monsters. Let's go ahead and head on over to the next faction and see what they have in store for us. Okay, so here we are making our way to Skellig as our first play, and you can see that I actually took the time to show you that I Mulligan Nekker. I always Mulligan Nekker versus Skellig. They just blow it up too easily. So, unless my mulligans are too risky, that is. So, I start in this situation with Foglet because Broover likes to play the 3-point engine, which does 1 damage. And so I just play the Foglet just early and often, so that way if they do play it, I can Cyclops it. And if they don't play it, then I just progress with my Thrive units, and I just wait for them to play it. So you can see that they played the Elven Swordmaster, and so it's just a good thinning card for my Cyclops to take care of it with the Foglet. So just keep in mind that when you're against Skellig, feel free to play Foglet instead of Griffin or anything else first. If you have to, you can play the Rider if you don't have a Foglet, or maybe even just the Witchers. If you play the Witchers, then you can take care of the Swordmaster that way. But Foglet is definitely one of the better bets. So with that being said, let's actually go ahead to our final faction and see what our good friend Nilfgaard has in store for us. Okay, guys, so here we are versus our friend Morvran. So what do you play first versus Morvran? I like to play Nekkers. Why? Because they need Oxensurette to deal with the Nekkers or Gimpy. Or they're just wasting a lock on one of your Nekkers, and that protects your Foglets. So the Foglets are important to thin out your deck. So I start with Nekkers. You could say, oh, but if you play a Foglet first, and they don't lock it, and they play an engine like they did now, you can kill it. That's true, but a smart Morvran player will just boost it 1 time, so it's a 5. And then you're actually behind because you didn't play your Nekkers to start off with. So it's counterintuitive, but it actually makes sense just to do your Nekkers early and then work your way into the Foglet after they use their locks, or even before if you need to. One thing I do want to mention is that I'd put the Gernichora fruit in the ranged row. You almost always want to put in the melee row because you need to be able to use your Cyclops. It didn't matter in this situation because I was able to do the Drowner, and I think I knew that at the time. But just always make sure that you play Gernichora fruit in the melee row. So those are all the tips I have, 1 for each faction. So let's go ahead and move back to the deck builder, and then we can start wrapping things up. Alright, so here we are back in the deck builder. So I have a nifty notepad that I put right here. And so what I'd like to do with the notepad right quick is do a brief recap with you. And let's just go over those tips that I gave you for each video one more time. So that way it's easier to visualize. Because some people are like the video and some people like the text. And I'll actually put it in the comment section of my YouTube as well as the play Gwent whenever it comes out. So that way that it's easier for you to keep track of it. So let's start with Nilfgaard, which was our first one. So tip 1 versus NR. Start with Rider to kill engine. Start with Rider to kill the engine. That's easy enough, right? Tip number 2, we did, I believe it was SK. Tip number 2 versus SK is to versus SK. You want to start with Foglet. So Marauder helps you thin. That's easy enough. Tip 3, we played versus, what was it? Versus monsters. Versus monsters, you want to start with Rider and tactically advantage the Rider to prevent counter. To prevent the opponent to counter you with their own Rider. And you also want to take care of their engines. Tip number 4 was versus ST. Versus ST Mulligan Nekkers. And start with Foglet to kill engines. And we'll put the T away so that way it fits. And finally, tip 5 was versus Nilfgaard. And versus Nilfgaard, start with, what do you start with? Start with Nekkers, that's right. You start with Nekkers to bait locks, and that's basically it. And then Foglet. So there you have it. Those are the 5 tips that I would recommend versus each faction, one for each one. There's obviously more that you can do. It's amazing. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but I made this entire video just what happens when you go first and you have to make the first move. I think that's the most important thing in the entire game is the first move, because it sets you up for success. And if you make one small misstep, it just snowballs for the rest of the game. So thank you so much for watching this video, whether it was on YouTube or the Playground website. If you'd like to see more content that I create, then you can just head on over to my Twitch channel, and I'll see you next time.